And in the words of Rachel's granddaughter, it is a disturbing story. Well, I'm running out of time. Before I get into this little sermonette, I want to thank Yogi Berra. You're supposed to share who's taught you these things, what you're going to talk. Yogi Berra, who said you can't hit what you can't see, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. And also Reverend Jack Cormack, who preached a sermon, as a matter of fact, right down there about 4 or 5 years ago on the passage of the Israelites crossing the Jordan. So there, I want to revisit 2 sermons about David and Goliath and the other about Joshua crossing the Jordan, because I think they're a lot of fun to do, and I rarely repeat a sermon. But as somebody told me the other night, they said, "Well, David, you've already preached them, you don't need to do it again." And I said, "Well, we know for a fact that most people only get about 10% of a sermon, so I can preach it 9 more times for you." Bob Hamill, I'm sorry. Anyway, it's kind of fun. And what I want to talk about is the idea that miracles can occur before realization. And I think that's kind of enjoyable to think about that. I want to talk about David and Goliath real quickly. The text we read today said that David was proficient with a sling and a stone, and we can well imagine that he had countless hours of boredom taking care of the sheep out there in the hostile environs of the desert. And he would take care of the sheep and obviously protect them from the wild beasts. And no question, to ease his boredom, he practiced, and it had to have been hours and hours and hours on end, flinging rocks at imaginary targets or real targets. Now, as you know, a sling, as a matter of fact, looks like that. It's a pouch, and it has strings on the end of it, and then you wrap it around your wrist, and you get going like this, and then you let it go. Okay? And the projectile then comes out like that. And obviously he was good enough, and obviously he was strong enough in heart, that we know that he killed lion and bear. And this is a story, I think, that needs never to be overlooked, because it makes one wonder which is more dangerous. A 10-foot man, or 9 or 8, whatever Goliath was, or a killer wild beast. And which would you rather confront? What I'm trying to dispel is the romantic notion that you got this little boy, 14, 15-year-old boy named David, who's ruddy and pleasant to look at, and he goes up against this Philistine, which is a great word, who's going to devour him. Anyway, long story short, I had the good fortune of being a pretty good baseball player in high school and in college, and I was fortunate enough to bat against some guys that went ahead and signed major league contracts, and probably some of them actually played in the major leagues. I don't know. But I can tell you this, Pete Rose is exactly right when he says that the hardest thing to do in any sport is to hit a major league curveball, or for that matter, a major league fastball. And for those who have played competitive baseball, hardball, the real thing, you know that that's pretty true. Now, the pitcher, I'm setting this up and you'll understand this, that the pitcher's mound, let's say, would be about right where I am, and the plate would be right about near the back door, 60 foot, 6 inches. And a real good pitcher can throw the ball at about 95 miles an hour. Some can get a little higher than that. Most probably throw in the low 90s, very high 80s. That is still very, very fast. I want you to think about that. And you see these batters getting doinked every now and then. It's pretty darn difficult to get out of the way of a major league fastball thrown from the mound directly at your head. You know, it's hard to do. It is hard to do. Now, I'm mentioning that because Yogi Berra said, once again, oh Yo, he said, when asked why he was unable to hit this particular pitcher, he responded, how can you hit what you can't see? And the idea behind that, I batted against a guy that played for the Yankees, signed to the Yankees, and one that signed to the Dodgers. And when they would throw these fastballs, they'd look about the size of aspirins. But the funny thing is they'd go bzzz, just like a hornet goes by your head. That's the noise from the whatever they call it, the threads. Go bzzz like that. You could hardly see them. And these guys, they were throwing in the 90s at any moment. So the point is, it's very difficult to see it. It's very dangerous. You have to be an extremely good athlete to be able to bat against a man that's a major league pitcher. And I mention that because if you look at David, who has spent however many years out in the desert, if you look at David, who has practiced over and over, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times with this slingshot, well, you can see where I'm going. A slingshot wound up and wound up and wound up with proficiency would go probably from here to the door at about 130 miles an hour. That's about 35 miles an hour faster than a real good major league pitcher. Now, if you took a major league batter and put them in their batter's box, and somebody got up there and threw a ball at their head 130 miles an hour, there's no way they could get out of the way. So you can see what I'm suggesting, that Goliath was a dead man walking. He didn't have a chance. He didn't have a chance. And we need to make sure we don't romanticize this. David had every advantage over him. Goliath had no possible way of killing David. It was an impossibility. And so when the 15-year-old boy goes like that, there's no way that Goliath can get out of the way and conks him right in the head, and that's it. Now, I want to talk about that just a little bit, because the so-called miracle of David killing Goliath is really a misnomer. In fact, it had already happened, the miracle. Goliath was dead before he knew it. He had no chance. The miracle had happened long before his demise, and it took place in the years that David disciplined himself for that moment. The miracle was that David, the boy, had disciplined himself. And so when this happened, there was nothing to it. That is not to diminish anybody. That's to lift up David. 250 years earlier, before David, the Israelites, and this is a great story. After 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, they were preparing to enter Canaan. You know the story. And so they come to the River Jordan. And they stand there before the River Jordan in the springtime, but the Jordan is flooded. And so there's no way that they're going to be able to get across into the land flowing with milk and honey that spring. Now, as you know, and if you didn't, you'll appreciate it now, this crossing of the Jordan by the Israelites is a reminder of the Israelites standing there in front of the Red Sea and getting ready to cross the Red Sea. So just as Moses stands there and he's operating in effect as a priest, standing in front of the water, so too are the priests standing in front of the water there at the Jordan. There's also another theme, and I'm going to go a couple minutes long, so just hold me on this. Not much more than this. There's one of the most wonderful themes in all of Scripture, and the same thing is happening here, sort of, with people at the Jordan. The Israelites, when they, let me shift gears, the Israelites, when they get to the Red Sea, they look out, and that's their future, right? And what's their future? Bleak. Because there's nothing water, and water is symbolic of chaos and darkness. So they have no hope. Now behind them is their past, right? And in their past, what's coming up to get them? Pharaoh. So if they turn around, their past is coming up to get them and kill them. If they look out into their future, they have no future. And so where are they? They're only standing there in the present. That's why I'm an existentialist, as a matter of fact. So I'm serious. So that's where they're standing. That's where the existential crisis is. They're in the present, and what are they going to do? What are they going to do? And so we have the same thing that's happening here. The Israelites have spent 40 years in the desert. They've come to the water. If they look back, go back to Moab and Ammon and all these places, and nothing but desert. There's nothing there. So the past can't take care of them. They look out in their future, and they can kind of see the land flowing with milk and honey, but in front of them, the waters of chaos. And so once again, they're in that existential crisis, and what are you going to do? Now the point of this is the man of God could have been a woman of God. A man of God stands up, in the case of Moses, and directs them. Oh, incidentally, for Moses to go into the water, what does he have to get wet? His feet. Oh, so the priests are there, and the priests are told, what do they have to do? You have to go into the Jordan, and you have to get your feet wet. And once you do that, then you'll prepare this so that the people can walk across. So that's what happens. The priests go into the water. When they touch the water with their feet get wet. You can see where I'm going with that. Sometimes, I'll help you with this. Sometimes if you want a miracle to happen in your life, what do you have to do? You have to get your feet wet. See? So anyway, they stand in there, and something happens when they do this. 10 miles away, near Adam, the waters pile up in a heap. And that's the same language that is used for when the Red Sea is crossed. The waters pile up in a heap. So the waters 10 miles away pile up in a heap. Now I was doing some figuring here, and I don't know what water during the spring flows at, but let's say 10 miles an hour. What do you think? So about 10 miles an hour? 10 and a half? 5 miles an hour? I don't know. Let's say 5 miles an hour. If you got the waters over here pile up 10 miles upstream, and so they're stopped, then that means it's going to take 2 hours, right, before the water empties out, right? Now, this is what I'm getting at. The miracle had already happened. And for the people to enjoy the miracle, what did they have to do? They had to move. Isn't that great? The miracle had already happened. And so the priests are there standing in the water, and then the water finally goes by. But God had already taken care of the people 2 hours earlier by piling up the water in a heap. I mention this because, real quickly, what happens is this, and I've seen it as a pastor almost for 40 years now. People want miracles in their lives, and the miracles have already happened. And so I don't ask for miracles for people. I ask for them to get new eyeballs.